Okay, thank you very, very much indeed for coming to the Heavenly Voices evening here at the Riveria Hotel tonight. Sorry you've been waiting a bit of time, but we got there in the end. And basically, for those who are expecting a choral group called Heavenly Voices singing away, you're going to be in for a disappointment because there won't be anything like that tonight. For those that don't know, Heavenly Voices is Dorset's mediumship duo, and many of you have probably had readings with them or heard about them. They do readings around the Dorset area. And they come through with clarifying results, absolutely gobsmacking results that are very, very accurate. Certainly the most accurate readings I've ever seen anyway. So who am I? Well, my name is Geddes-Ward, and I'm a researcher, an artist. I've got some artwork down there if you want to take a look at that in the break. And I'm also a researcher into the paranormal. And for the past 30 years, I've been researching the paranormal in all sorts of manners. That's everything from UFOs, ghosts, poltergeists, mediumship, things like that. So I've kind of got a very general understanding of what these things are. And so tonight I'm going to explain to you why Heavenly Voices are so different and what sets them apart from other people you may have heard and seen. So without further ado, I'll launch into this. So what is mediumship, first of all? Let's just have a hands up. Who's seen Heavenly Voices or gone for a reading with them? Okay, about half of you. Who's looking forward or on the waiting list to go? Okay, so we'll try and give you a breakdown of exactly what they do and the kind of results that they got through. I'm sure you'll be very interested. And we'll hopefully have some of you maybe up here who've had readings that are willing to come up and maybe share some of your stories if you're willing to do that. You don't have to, but it's up to you. But it'd be certainly interesting to hear some of your tales as well. Okay, so mediumship, basically, if you think of the media, you've got TV, radio, newspapers, the internet. That's a communication system, isn't it? And you've got information coming backwards and forwards through all these different mediums. And so when you talk about a medium, a person that's a medium, they're receiving information as well. But they're not necessarily getting it through radio broadcasts or TV. They're getting it from some other place. You might call it the sixth sense, a psychic ability, some super part of the brain or the mind, and they're getting messages purported to be from somewhere else, like the afterlife. Does anyone believe in life after death? Yes. Only a few hands. I thought there'd be more than that, actually, but there we go. Okay, so basically, they claim to get messages from the afterlife. Now, I've actually been in psychic developing circles myself, because I was told many, many years ago that I was a medium. And I thought, nah, I've never seen a ghost, I've never seen a spirit, I've never heard voices. But they said, you have the ability. So I decided to give it a go. I joined a developing circle and I had some very interesting experiences. Things that actually, surprised me. I started to get results through that I can actually explain away in conventional terms. I started to get accurate readings with people. So that's just kind of a basic level. They call that mental mediumship. So if you think of people like Colin Fry, Tony Stockwell, those people on the TV you might have actually seen them live as well. They will go out on stage, rather like I am now, and they'll pick people out of the audience and say, I'm coming to you, sir, I'm coming to you, madam, I've got a gentleman here, or I've got a lady, and they're conveying information. Now, people say, well, why don't they give them the lottery numbers, or why don't they tell them all these factual things? But it's a very difficult process to get through. How it works is that they get pictures through in their mind. They call that clairvoyance. So they might see a mental image of something. So, for instance, you might get a picture of Big Ben in your mind. Now, does that mean they live in London, or does it mean the person that's communicating is called Ben? It comes through as a very symbolic image. So you have to bear that in mind. It's a bit like smoke signals. They have to try and interpret it. So the medium has to try and take those images and translate it into something that the recipient, i.e. yourselves, might understand. And sometimes it's a very hit or miss process. And it's not because the medium is generally they're not a fake medium. They're literally trying to do their best to interpret what's going on, and sometimes they get it wrong. It's like, you tell someone this and they tell you that, and by the time it gets down to the third person, it's been slightly distorted. And it's the same thing with mental mediumship. Things get distorted as they come through. Now, there's other types of mediumship. There's clairaudience, and that's where mediums sometimes hear voices. They may hear a voice in their ear, they may hear it mentally, they may hear a name, they may hear a name of a road, a name of a person, something like that, and sometimes that comes through in conjunction with the mental mediumship. And again, it can be slightly wrong, it can come through on really good occasions, it can come through really, really accurately, but that's rare and far and few between. Now, there's other types of mediumship, which is called physical mediumship. Has anyone heard of physical mediumship? No? 1 or 2 people, okay. So for those that don't know, physical mediumship is an even rarer form of mediumship, okay? So it might involve sometimes the mental mediumship and the voices, but more often than not, it involves manifestations and things moving around. So if you think of a poltergeist, for instance, a poltergeist is a noisy spirit. It's literally German for a noisy spirit. And that's the kind of thing that physical mediumship will entail. It's where it can make noises in the room. A spirit can manifest itself by doing a rap on a table, a knock in some way. Typically, though, in a séance, which is where people go to experience this in a controlled manner, they will have what they call a mediumship demonstration cabinet. It's a demonstration cabinet is, if you think of one of those things like a toilet tent you get in a camping site, and they stick it at one end of the room, and maybe you, the recipients, would see this toilet tent on the stage, and they'd have a person seated in there, and they would be maybe strapped in. That would be the medium. They'd be strapped into the chair. Sometimes they would have their mouth taped up, the idea to prevent fraud, basically, and they'd switch off all the lights. And supposedly phenomena would happen, okay? Now I'm going to talk a bit about that in a minute. I'll talk first of all about a genuine case of mediumship, what I thought was a genuine case of mediumship, and the lady didn't even realise she was a medium, which is a very interesting thing. About 30 odd years ago, I was doing tarot card readings, and normally people came to my house, and on this particular occasion I had a phone call from a lady who said that she wanted a reading but she couldn't drive, and would I go to her house? I said, well, okay, I'll come to your house. So I went to her house, I gave the reading as normal, and she said, that's very accurate, but there's one thing you haven't said. And I said, well, what's that? And she said, well, there's one thing you didn't mention. She says, you haven't mentioned my husband. And I said, well, if I felt your husband around, I definitely would have mentioned him to you. And she goes, well, it's interesting you say that. She goes, she lived in a bungalow. She says, in this bedroom here, my husband spent the last year of his life, and he was so ill that he had to have an oxygen machine just to breathe. She goes, and one day she was puffing his pillows up, trying to make him more comfortable, and he kept saying, I feel so ill, I just want to die. I literally just want to die, I feel so ill. And she said, with that, he actually died. He flopped her arms and just died there and then. And she laid him down, and she said she saw this vaporous mist come out of his chest, like a glowing sort of vaporous mist, come out of his chest, went right across the room and ended up in the airing cupboard of the bedroom. And she was totally gobsmacked. She thought, what the hell's happened? And then she said, I tell you this, and I know you won't laugh, but I told my doctor this, and he just laughed at me. She goes, but I know you won't laugh. She said, 6 months later, I was waking up in the middle of the night, and she said, and this is her words, she said, I saw a red Indian coming out that airing cupboard. And she said, I could see him with a full headdress, I could see the war paint on his face, I could see a bone necklace, and I could only see him from the chest upwards, and he was doing this. And she says, and behind him, there appeared to be a second man who was in the shadows, and behind him, there was another man who appeared to have a bowler hat on. But she said, I could definitely see this red Indian. And she said it wasn't just a one-off occurrence, it was happening every single night. This Native American Indian, we might say today, was coming out the cupboard. And she goes, what's happening? And I said, well, I think what you're witnessing there is materialization of some sort. And she didn't understand what I meant. Now, has anyone heard spirit guides, the term spirit guides? A few of you have. Okay, for those that don't know, in seances, as well as the normal relatives that come through in seances, you get people that come through from the other side that are much more advanced than us as we are today. So, for instance, the Native Americans and other people that are much more spiritually in tune with nature, when they pass over to the other side, they're kind of higher, more experienced, much more higher spiritually than us normal folk here, if you like. So therefore, they have a much more heightened awareness of how to do things. And generally, in a physical seance or a mental mediumship seance, these mediums will work with these guides and they will help relay the information, and they'll sometimes be there present in physical seances. Now, I said to this lady, I said, I bet your husband thought all this kind of stuff was rubbish. And she said, yeah, absolutely, he thought the whole thing was rubbish. I said, that's part of the key. I said, I believe that your husband, because he thought it was rubbish, he hasn't got the mental ability to come back and communicate with you, but somehow he's using this Native American spirit guide, because that's what I believed he was, is coming through to bring your husband back. And I said, I think he's the second gentleman behind the Native American. I said, there's a third chap who, with the bowler hat on, I said, he might be a relative or friend of yours as well, but wasn't sure. So She said, well, what did I do about it? I said, well, is it happening every night? She goes, yeah, it was happening every single night. This red Indian was coming out of the cupboard. So I said, well, the best thing I can suggest you do is try and talk to him, try and communicate in some way. I said, if that doesn't work, then maybe try and, I mean, this is the days before the internet. I said, ring 192 and ask the Spiritualist Association of Great Britain in London or the College of Psychic Studies, and she wrote them both down. Ring them and tell them exactly what you've told me and see if they can offer any advice. But it was my assumption that this Native American Indian was trying to bring back her husband. Now, why was he coming out of the airing cupboard, and why did that mist go in the airing cupboard? Well, I don't know if any people read many ghost stories or heard spirit tales and things like that, but a lot of these spirits are always sighted in doorways. And I've wondered this for a long, long time. And I actually wonder if somehow doorways have a way of containing the energy of a spirit. It helps it manifest in some way. So I believe that the cupboard, in the same way that this spirit was coming through, is also similar to the cabinet I described earlier, where you get the spirits coming out of a physical cabinet at the front of a seance room. Now, that, I believe, was a genuine experience. I'm going to talk about something that I believe was a fake experience as well. I said I've been to see all sorts of different mediums, and I went to this place in Banbury a number of years ago, and I saw this demonstration of mediumship there, and it's a Christmas tree seance, they called it. And it was a room rather like this, maybe a bit smaller, but there was an aisle down there with seats and everything, and they switch out all the lights. And they also check you. They remove any cameras, anything reflective, any recording devices, any cameras. You're not allowed to take it in there. It's like airport security. They're checking you for everything. And all these rooms, all the lights here would be blacked out. All the windows would be blacked out. It'd be total blackness, apart from on the stage, there'd be two red lights, like infrared. If you think of, like, old days film laboratory where it'd be processing film, they'd switch off all the lights, they'd have an infrared light. It's rather like that. They claim it's to protect the phenomena, because otherwise the phenomena can only work in that kind of conditions. But the other side of the coin is it's also open to fraud, which is a problem, because everything's happening in the dark, you can't always see it, and it's only when they switch on these infrared lights, which are supposedly safer to make the conditions work, can you see some things happening. So I was about halfway down the aisle seat, I was on the edge of the seat, and I was watching this thing, and this voice of this spirit guide came through, called Jonathan, and he spoke in a very thick Irish accent. But I actually found out after the seance that Jonathan, this spirit guide, was an East End barra boy from London. So I thought, well, why does he sound like an Irishman? It didn't quite tally up. I couldn't work it out. Now, during this seance, drums were being played. There's actually a small snare drum at the front of the stage near the medium, who was still strapped up inside this cabinet. You could hear drums being played really, really well. And I thought, well, whoever's playing those drums can play it really extremely well. Supposedly, they're not trying to give you the impression that it's a spirit that's playing these drums. And then you heard of a voice of this young girl coming through called Maria, and she was supposedly a French Jewish girl that died in World War II, and she was 8 years old, I believe. But to me, the voice sounded rather like the TV children's program, The Tweenies. If anyone's familiar with The Tweenies, they got these silly voices. It sounded exactly like that, like a ventriloquist dummy type of thing, or Punch and Judy. Yeah, exactly. I couldn't take it seriously. And it would be great in hindsight, had I known that, if I had someone that could speak French with me, to converse with this French spirit guide to see if they'd actually talk French back. But it never happened, unfortunately. Now, at the point where they felt a bit more confident, they said that Jonathan, this spirit guide, was going to manifest his hand from the spirit world into our world through ectoplasm. Now, we've perhaps heard of ectoplasm, but it's supposedly a material that comes out of the body of a medium and can be formed into a solid form. And the idea is it can take shape, and the spirit world can maneuver this stuff into a solid form. So they said, we feel confident that we can manifest Jonathan's hand. And so at the bottom of this cabinet, you saw this arm come out from under this cloth, and it wriggled around and waved to everybody in this infrared light. And they said, now we're going to invite someone up to actually shake hands with his hand. And this guy came up, and he went to lift this kind of screen up. And they said, no, don't do that, don't do that. Just shake hands with a hand. So I was a bit suspicious. If he lifted it up, what would we actually see? So he shook hands with his hand and then said, okay, go and take your seat. And then they felt confident enough a little bit more to get everyone in a queue lined up to come and shake hands with Jonathan, the spirit guide. So I formed in the queue with everybody else, and everyone went up and shook hands with this thing. Now, I've read in books that they say that this materialized hand, if you like, or the bodies that they materialize, they're rather like to touch rather like touching a candle. If you just touch a greasy candle, it feels like that, they say. So when I went and touched this hand, to me, it felt like a human hand. It didn't feel the way I was expecting it to feel. It gave me the thumbs up, and it felt like a very human hand to me. It felt warm. I could see the hairs in it. I could see marks in it and things like that. It didn't feel the way I was expecting it. So I was really, really suspicious by this point. So anyway, I went home disappointed. Oh, the other thing I should add is that because I was sitting in the aisle seat, this hand kept snaking backwards under this screen, and they kept saying, "Oh, it's dematerializing." And so I thought, oh, I'm going to have a look at this. So I actually got down on my hands and knees in the darkness and looked through these infrared lights to see this hand supposedly dematerializing. And in fact, I saw the hand lift up like that. So again, that suggested to me it was attached to a real body. So we all formed this queue. We all came up and shook hands with it. And to me, as I said, it felt real. And I was slightly disappointed. I thought, I've just paid 30 quid for this. It doesn't feel quite the ticket. So the next day I went on the internet to see if I could find any reports of this seance, these people that do this seance. And I actually found a report of someone that had been to the same Christmas tree seance about 4 years earlier. And it read exactly, moment for moment, exactly how I'd experienced it the previous night. Almost as if the whole thing was pre-scripted. And if you think of magic shows, everything's got to work on a scripted thing, that someone's got to do something at a certain point to make it work. I felt that this was the case in this particular seance. So I thought, okay, if I ever went there again, I'm searched from head to toe, cameras are taken off me, recording devices are taken off me. How can I prove that it's a fake? And I thought, I'm an artist, I paint pictures. Now, with oil paints, which is what I use, they take about 3 or 4 days to dry, depending on how thick you paint them on. Now, they come in tubes, rather like toothpaste, and you can unscrew the lid and squirt it on and start painting your picture. Now, I thought, I'm checked from head to foot for recording devices, but if I squirted a little bit of red oil paint on my finger before I went into the seance and then put a little plaster on there, and when I'm checked like this, they'd see a plaster on my finger, they wouldn't even think about it. They'd just say, oh, he's had a finger cut. They wouldn't even acknowledge it. They wouldn't even see it. So when it came to the point where I was invited to go and shake hands with this materialised spirit hand, I'd make sure I was the last person in the queue, and then I'd come to the point where it comes to shake the hand, I'd whip my plaster off and rub my oil paint all over the finger of supposedly Jonathan's hand. So his hand would literally be covered in red oil paint. And the only thing that can remove that red oil paint is something, pardon the pun, called white spirit. And I doubt very much if the spirit would have got that on tap around the back of their cabinet there, you know. So I literally would catch them red-handed, pardon the pun again. So that's something to be aware of. You've got to be, you know, and the other thing that they didn't do, they didn't bring through any real information in this seance. They didn't bring anyone's names in that we knew. It was just gimmicks and tricks and things like that, which I felt was, you know, it wasn't quite what I would say convincing enough. If they brought through someone that I knew from the spirit world, then to me that might have convinced me. But there was nothing that could be verified at all. In fact, there was a lot to be suspicious about. So that's 2 examples there. One I felt of genuine mediumship. The lady wasn't even trying to be a medium, yet I think she was a natural medium, seeing things coming out of her cupboard. And then there's this where people try and fake things. So then we come to heavenly voices. So they're a slightly different kettle of fish from that. But I think they fall into the bracket of physical mediumship, because they're not up on stage like your Tony Stockwell's, your Colin Fry's, saying, I'm coming to you, mad, and I'm feeling this, that, and the other. They're actually using a form of spiritual communication where they're using a glass and a board with letters. And the glass is moving around and spelling out words. Very, very accurate information is coming through them. So I'll talk about how did it start? Because obviously Andy and Lisa, they've always said to, every time they've done sessions with people always say, well, how did you get into this? How did it all begin? And they said they haven't got the time to explain it. They have to obviously get on to the next client or something. So they've asked me to help them put this evening together to explain where did it all begin, okay? So I've got some notes here because I can't remember everything, so bear with me as I read it. So Lisa, one part of the duo, of course, used to get up early and go downstairs and make her brother's breakfast because she was very eager to help out in the house and things like that. And every day she used to go downstairs and make breakfast for her brothers. And she says one day she was downstairs and there in the kitchen was a man with grey hair, a beard and dungarees. And she thought, well, he's definitely not off of play school, so he's from somewhere. But then she looked again and he was gone. And she thought, where the hell did he go to? So she spoke to her mum about it, and her mum decided to look into the history of the house, and they came to the assumption, they thought that it might have been the person that owned the house previously, who had apparently died in the living room. And he was maybe still hanging around, or part of his consciousness was still hanging around, making himself known. And to this day, he could be still haunting it. Who knows? And maybe to this day, Lisa's brothers are still waiting for their breakfast. I don't know. Now, Andy, on the other hand, he was slightly different. His mum and dad got divorced when he was 10 years old, and his mum used to go out a lot of the time, leaving him by himself. And the one that he kind of became close to was his grandma. Ida, her name was, and so he obviously had a very good relationship with her, and she died, unfortunately. But he said that one day he saw his grandmother's face appear at the bottom of his bed, and she looked very stern and upset. He thought, oh, you know, why is she so upset? And then a few days later, he said that he saw her face in the bathroom through the mirror, or I think it was the glass actually, through the glass, and the frosted glass of the bathroom. He saw her face appear through there. But this time she was smiling. But he actually felt that maybe she was a little bit angry because Andy was left quite a lot on his own. He kind of brought himself up to a certain extent. So he felt that maybe the first appearance of her being stern was because Mum wasn't there, and she was trying to sort of like look after him. And he felt her presence a lot in his life as he was getting older. He felt her influence was there in the background, guiding him, don't do this, but do that type of thing, you see. So she helped him, he believed, also get through troubled times, and he did have a lot of troubled times, and he came out of those and things started to get a lot better. He started to also experience strange phenomena in the house. He started to hear bangs and raps and noises, and sometimes voices as well. And he said that one time he came home and he found the light fitting had been completely removed from the light, along with the shade, and it was just placed carefully there on the floor. No one had touched it. His mum had been out of the house the whole time. He certainly hadn't touched it, and it was only him and his mum in the house. So who had touched it? Who had put that light there? It hadn't exploded, it hadn't fallen to the ground and smashed to pieces. It had been neatly placed there by something. So that was a bit of a possible example, maybe, of the spirit world showing their presence there. Now, as they got older, they obviously went into their various jobs, and Lisa got to know this colleague of hers and started working with a colleague. And it turned out that this colleague was married to Andy. So they all got together on a social sometime, and get some smiles over there. Is that Andy's family by any chance? Yes, I thought so. So basically, they got to know each other's interest in the paranormal. And they found out one of these paranormal clubs in the area, and they said, well, let's go and check it out and see if we can find out what they're doing. So they used to go there and check out what was happening. But they just used to have discussions, and they were itching to do more. Lisa and Andy were itching to go and do investigations and things like that. So one time, Andy suggested trying a glass on a table, and they put it there. And guess what? Nothing happened. Nothing happened at all. And for 2 years, they were trying this glass on a table, just moving it around. Nothing was happening. So you think, well, most people would have given up. But they persisted. They carried on. They felt that they should carry it on in some way. So one time they went to Scaplin's Court, I think it's called. Anyone from Poole? Some of you from Poole, you know Scaplin's Court? It's a museum there, and it goes back to the Middle Ages. It's a listed building. I guess it's possibly haunted as well. But one day they was there, and Andy and Lisa tried their glass with the letters on the table, and hey presto, it actually worked at that place. The glass started to slowly move around, and it started to spell out the name of a maid that was employed there many, many years previously, maybe hundreds of years, maybe in the Middle Ages. And she gave lots of information about her, how she was killed, what killed her, and things like that. Now, it was a breakthrough. They said they felt a very strange feeling in their tummy, like butterflies. And to me, that suggests that they've had this something called the chakras. Anyone heard of the chakras? It's energy centers through the body. And there's something called the solar plexus chakra. And normally when you're developing psychic mediumship, you develop these chakras to open up. And I think that what they did, they triggered this chakra, and they described it as a nice feeling in their tummy. And I think this was the chakra stirring, and the energy started to flow a little bit more. And anyway, so they got this information from this maid that had come through and said how she died and what killed her and everything like that. Now, they knew nothing about this place, and an employee of this museum said, come with me, and she took them into a back room, and there was this plaque on the wall, and it was a complete history of the whole place, and it gave names, dates, and everything like that. And this woman said, you've never been in this room, have you? And they said, no. And they said, well, on this plaque is information that you've just brought through the board. Amazingly, you've absolutely got everything that's come through there. So to them, that was a confirmation that something was working. Accuracy was starting to come through. Now, 2 weeks later, they thought they'd try to communicate with their families, and Andy's grandmother, Ida, came through, and that again was a breakthrough. She said, "At last we can talk. We've all been waiting for you. This is how you're going to do it, and you're going to help a lot of people." So she was making a prediction. It's like it was almost there was a team waiting on the other side for certain breakthroughs to happen, which they started to happen, and then they're all going to go forward. And they obviously had plans for Andy and Lisa to progress with this in some way, shape or form. And further confirmation came through that evening when Andy's grandmother said, "I've got your great-grandfather here." And Andy said, "Well, I never knew him. You know, he died before I was born." And she said, "Well, his name is John, but everyone called him Jack." And Andy thought, okay. So Andy later on that evening rang his mum up, and she confirmed that his great-grandfather was called John, but everyone called him Jack. And that was something that Andy didn't know about at all. So these were confirmations starting to give them confidence in what they were doing. So they started to practice their craft. They started to practice it on neighbours and friends, and people used to come round. I mean, there was a time initially when his neighbour came round, and the glass was moving, spelling out names, and his neighbour said, "This name doesn't mean anything to me." He says, "I thought you meant to bring through people that we know." And Andy said, "Well, I don't know. I don't know what's happening." And it spelled out these various names. And the neighbour went off, slightly disappointed. They weren't charging people by it. It's just a neighbour that called in to have a go. They weren't charging people, and he went off slightly disappointed. And about a week later, he turned up at his door shaking like a leaf. And he goes, come in, what's happened? Have you been attacked?" And he goes, No, I haven't been attacked. I'm shaking because of what you told me last week." He says, "Well, what do you mean? Sit down." He says, "Well, you gave me 3 names that came through on that glass last week." He goes, "Yeah." He said, "Well, I've just found out that they're relatives of mine from 300 years ago." And he had backtracked through the family and found 3 names that corresponded in his family tree to 300 years ago. So I thought it's good to stay in touch, isn't it? They're a little bit late, of course. Now, there is a time when their names were getting about a bit, and various people were saying, "Oh, can you do a reading for so-and-so? Can you do a reading for this person?" People, they started not to know. And this is where the real test came through, because they couldn't be attributed to things that if they didn't know these people, there's nothing they could be accused of getting information about them. And one of their first people they did was a policeman, and they're going to tell you more about this when they come out later on. But I'll just give you a brief overview. This policeman had unfortunately lost someone very, very close to him, his brother, a few years ago. And his relative, his brother, came back and spoke to him through this board. And he gave him details, names of how he died. And he actually took his own life, unfortunately, this poor chap. But he told him why he did it and everything. And Andy and Lisa were obviously very moved by this. And a few weeks later, the policeman said, "I feel so much better now. I feel that the weight has been lifted from my mind, and he's now not taking medication anymore, and he actually feels rejuvenated." And I must admit, when I've had a reading with Heavenly Voices and a few other people that I was with, we all felt rejuvenated and spiritually uplifted as well. There was a time when things again started to warm up and heat up. As they started to do more readings, the spirit world were taking note of them. It seemed like the spirit world were a few jumps ahead of the game, so to speak. One time Andy was coming back with his family, and he said he saw an intruder in his house. So he told his family, "Stand back, there's someone in the house." But he said he could see this man standing down the hallway near the living room door, but he was sparkling. If you think of sparklers that children have, this man appeared to be sparkling and glowing. And then they looked again, and the man had gone. What was all that about? So anyway, a few days later, they were given a reading to a family in Ferndown. And the glass moved around and spelt out various things, but an apology came through the board, and it said, "I'm sorry for scaring you, Andy. I was the one that was in your house." So it turns out that there was this spirit that was checking out Andy, seeing what he was like before the reading took place. And then he turns up later on the board, which was quite an interesting thing. He gave evidence of how he died on his BMX, and he said he needed to check what Andy was like before he came through to his family 2 weeks later. And he actually apologised for scaring him and his family. He obviously was just trying to be careful about the whole thing. Now, sometimes in these situations, you get people that come through you're not expecting. I mean, in seances or demonstrations of mediumship, you get things called queue jumpers, and that's where someone's given a reading to someone, and then suddenly they give a name, and they say, I'm sorry, I can't take that name, and it turns out to be that someone's jumped the queue of people that want to communicate, and they say, no, me next, and they literally jump the queue. And this happened in cases with Andy and Lisa. A man queue jumped a session asking to speak to Rob and his family, but no one in the room knew who Rob was. Perplexed, they asked him to move aside and allow family members to come through, and eventually this guy moved on. He said, okay. Now, a few days later, they had a phone call, and it was a man that doing the booking. He said, my name's Rob, and I want to have a booking with you. And it was only a sort of maybe a day or two after the reading, it occurred to them that that was the chap that had come through that wanted to speak to Rob. He had queue jumped a previous session trying to get through. So it seems like the spirit will try and impress people to make a booking or to seek out a medium, because they're desperately trying to seek to comfort the people here. I mean, let's think about it. If you lot died, if one of you died and you was in the spirit world, you'd want to try and communicate, presumably, with your loved ones back on earth. And if you knew there was a way to do it, you'd try your hardest to do that. You'd try and either queue jump or impress on people to go and seek people out if there's a way of influencing them to try and make communication, because you'd want to let them know that you're okay, basically. And this is what is happening. They're finding people on the other side are trying to impress Andy and Lisa to go certain places, or impressing their relatives to come through and have a session with them. That's what it seems to be like. Now, with that in mind, there also seems to be an intelligence behind the board. There seems to be some sort of super intelligence that sometimes is behind the people that are coming through anyway. People that couldn't read or write very well on this earth when they lived here have been found to come through on the other side, and they are reading and writing with no problem at all. So you think, well, have they learnt to read and write since they've passed over? But then it goes even further than that. They've had people of Russian that are having readings, and this particular Russian person came through and started spelling phonetically Russian words on the board using the English alphabet. And if anyone's familiar with the Russian alphabet, it looks a load of gobbledygook letters, all back to front and upside down and mirror right and everything. So what they're doing is phonetically spelling out the letters in like you would say if you were speaking Russian. And there was one particular instance where this person that was coming through, who was Russian, gave the name of his road in Russian, phonetically spelling out, and he used all 24 letters of their alphabet to give the name of his road. And it was taken, it was accepted by the recipient. Now, how would Andy and Lisa know that? They don't know Russian, and yet they were given a name which was accepted by the person having the session. And this has happened again with a Jewish gentleman who lived in England. He had a session with them, and his father came through and phonetically spelt out Jewish words that this man understood. And the real clincher was that he also said the very final words that he said in Jewish to his son, who was having the reading, just before he died. And he spelt that out in the Jewish language, and the man could take it, he could accept it. So there seems to be a super intelligence that can sometimes bypass the traditional way we think about things and help things move along in the board by helping those that are moving the letters from their side. Some intelligence seems to be assisting them in some way. Now, just move on here. Yes, there was this intelligence also manifested itself sometimes to them. It's one time the glass moved and it said to Andy and Lisa, it said, "You are my children. I have chosen you to do this." It said, "Andy, you must look up St. Peter, and Lisa, you have to look up Gabriel. If you do this, then you will understand." So Andy did look up St. Peter and found out to his surprise it's not actually his real name. St. Peter's real name is Andrew, of all things, which is interesting. And Gabriel, which he was asked also to look into, is the messenger from heaven to earth. So they felt that was kind of pertinent, it tied in with what they were actually doing. So Andy decided at that point to write down prayers to which they believed inspired them to say at the beginning of each session. And they also have closing prayers as well. So if any of you had readings, you may have seen them have these cards where they're saying prayers that open the session and prayers that also close the session. And that's why they're doing it, because they feel that they're being guided by these higher powers to conduct these, and they're doing it in the, what people say, in the light, the higher power of love or something like that, you see. Now, of course, it's not just people in Dorset that are hearing about Andy and Lisa. People further afield are getting wind of what they're doing. People in the entertainment industry, in the sporting industry as well. And there's a TV critic who came along. People perhaps have read his things in the papers and maybe seen him on TV sometimes, where he came along to Heavenly Voices once for a reading, and he was very, very sceptical at first, and various things came through on the board, and he said, well, you could have got that out of my book. I mentioned that in one of my books, and you could have got that out of my book. I've mentioned that in one of my books. And it was his father communicating from him. And so he said, just remember this. Do you remember when you were younger, you used to hide in the cellar when we had friends round? And that kind of made him pause for a little bit. He thought, how did you know that? Because apparently as a child, he used to hide in the cellar when they had visitors, and he would be listening to all their conversations. And it became a bit of a family joke, apparently, that he always knew what was going on because he was hiding in the cellar. Now, that wasn't published anywhere, to my knowledge, anyway. And yet, father came through with that information. So he said, oh, look, I've got to go now, I've got to go. And then the glass moved again. He said, one more thing, sit down. So he sat down. He said, I've got to tell you this. Your wife has got to make sure I get this right here, being diagnosed with cervical cancer. And he goes, he says, that's not my dad speaking. He'd always tell the truth. And my wife is fine, he said. She has got nothing wrong with her. But he also said the whole matter would take 2 years to clear up. And he didn't believe it. He said, I've got to go. So he drove off back to Kent, where he lives. And the very next day, he messaged Andy and said, you're not going to believe this. He said, when I got home late last night, my wife was in bed and she said, I've got something to tell you. I've got cervical cancer. And it dropped him like a bombshell. He never knew it. And yet it was mentioned in the reading in Weymouth. So how did they know about that? You know, how possibly could they have known anything like that? And then apparently it did take 2 years for the whole thing to clear up, because during the part of the operation, they made a slip up at the hospital. And so from the beginning of the point where she was diagnosed to the completion where they had to basically take the hospital to court and sue the hospital for mismanagement of the medical practices, it took 2 whole years to sort out, as the prophecy said in the reading from his father. So that was some guy that was highly skeptical, I think then became a believer. So showbiz has been in touch, but also the football world has recently in contact with Andy and Lisa in the shape of Bournemouth Football Club. And the wife of a football coach there came and had a reading very recently, and she was absolutely blown away with it. And she was so impressed that she's told her husband, who now wants to try and book a reading as well, and he's promised them football tickets and things like that. So the football world, and as well as the entertainment world, are starting to hearing about Andy and Lisa. So who knows where it's going to stop them? It's going to go on and on, I think. Now, it's not just the entertainment industry that they're obviously doing readings for. They're actually there for a main reason. It's help the bereaved, help the downhearted and things like that, and people that sometimes feel there's not worth going on. And they did get one lady come through who felt really, really down and suicidal because her husband had passed on. Her husband had come through, was giving lots of evidential information through the board about who he was, and gave lots of information about her, but he kept saying, you have got to move on. You've got to move on. Start again. But she wouldn't listen. She wouldn't listen. So she went home and she actually wrote a suicide note to her daughter and was going to post it. But something made her change her mind. Anyway, 6 months later, she turned up on the doorstep to Andy and Lisa for a reading. And she looked totally different. Her hair was glammed up, wearing new clothes, makeup. They didn't even recognise her. And she goes, you don't know me, do you? And she goes, they went, no. She goes, I'm so-and-so that had that reading off you 6 months ago. I was going to kill myself. But I took my husband's advice that came through the board. He told me to move on and start to change my life. And I've done that. And she actually turned up with a new fella as well for a reading. So that is the power of how this thing can work, and it can transform people's lives for the better, okay? So it's actually uplifting people and changing them. Now, it's obviously changed me. I've been investigating for this thing for 30 years, and I was absolutely overawed when I had a reading with him. And the thing was, I wasn't even expecting to have a reading with Heavenly Voices. I was with Monica, my partner here, and it was one Saturday morning. We had a phone call from Karen at the front there, thank you Karen, for including us. Apparently Heavenly Voices had a cancellation that Saturday morning last year, and they needed a few extra bums on seats. So we were asked, would we like to go along? So we said, oh, we've heard of these heavenly voices, but we're not sure what they're like. Let's go along, give it a go. Well, we're glad we did. So we went along to our friend Steph, who's not here tonight, but she was the person that was hosting it, and she had her first reading. And the thing that amazed me is that they said to Steph, okay, Steph, who do you want to bring through? Now, in most mediumship sessions that I've seen, it's normally someone saying, I'm giving you the name Fred, Bill, John, Dave, or whatever. It's very unusual for a medium to say, who do you want to bring through? So she just said, I want to bring through Craig. And so they said, Craig, are you there? And the board spat out, yes. And they said, Craig, how did you die? And this is what they typically ask people, how did you pass over? Because they want verification. And he wrote, train accident. And Steph agreed that Craig had died in a train accident. And basically, he came through lots of other inaccurate information. I won't tell you this, but he came through lots of other accurate information that she could verify. And there's nothing on paper that can connect Steph or Craig together, because Craig was 16 years old when he died in this train accident, and Steph was 17. They were boyfriend and girlfriend, but there was nothing on paper that connected them. They weren't engaged, they weren't married, they weren't living together. So there's nothing you could accuse them of saying, oh, well, they looked it up somewhere, they found a marriage certificate, they found some sort of piece of paper that said they lived together. There was nothing of that sort at all. And yet here he was coming through with that accurate information. So I would challenge the skeptics to say, well, how did they do that? And anyway, we had readings with other people that came through. Another one of Steph's relatives came through. I think it was her grandmother. And she said, Grandma, what was it, the one thing that you took round everyone's house, everywhere you went? You took one thing to everyone's house. What was it? And Grandma came back and said, it was my slippers. Everywhere she would go, she'd always take her slippers with her. And she goes, that's absolutely right. I always took my slippers. Now, it came to my turn towards the end of the evening, and it was passed over to me, and they said, is there anyone here for Neil? And the letter spelled out M, the letter M, and I kind of gulped. Now, I lost my mum in 2016, and her name was Margaret. So I thought, could this be my mum? Now, the protocol that Andy and Lisa have is that they usually ask them, can you give us the letter of your Christian name? Then can you give us your name? And can you give us your son or your daughter's month of birth? When my mum came through with flying colours, she broke all that protocol, and as soon as she said the letter M, she then spelled out, hi son. We went, oh. So they said, what is your name? And she said, Margaret. And I said, hi mum. And then again, she broke protocol. She said, I miss you. Now that really took me back, because we're all used to missing our loved ones when they pass on, or our friends when they pass on. But to actually pause to think that our loved ones probably do miss us as well. And that shows them that heaven, or whatever you want to call it, the spirit world, the afterlife, is not a perfect place. Otherwise they wouldn't miss us. But they actually miss us too, which is a kind of a different take on the books, isn't it? So it's kind of heartwarming to know that they do miss us. And I said, well, I miss you too. And she said, I miss you more. And I said, well, you can probably see me, but I can't see you. And she said, yes. So the reading then progressed. She confirmed my date of birth. And the only thing that she got a little bit stuck on, they said, can you tell us Neil's middle name? And the glass whizzed around, and it whizzed around, and it whizzed around. And then he says, come on, Margaret, tell us Neil's middle name. And it just kept whizzing around. Why wasn't she saying my middle name? Surely it's easy enough. And I thought, no, it's not. The reason is that I've got two middle names. And I think that my mum was probably trying to decide which middle name to give. So I said, no, stop it, don't stop the glass. I said, tell me the name of my dad. So the glass stopped, and then spelled out my dad's name, Brian. Now, most people spell Brian with a B-R-I-A-N, but she correctly spelt it B-R-Y-A-N, which is the way my dad spells the name. So then I asked further confirming questions. What's the name of my brother, born in 1968? I got 4 of them. So you remember, if they only had 4 hours to look all this up, they had to remember all this information. And they're meant to have bits of paper tucked between their legs, and they're looking under the table, things like that, you know. Which brother? You know, make sure they've got the right piece of paper for the right reading. I said, what's the name of my brother, born in 1968? She correctly came back with Philip. And then I asked things like, what TV programs did you watch? And she said, Carry On films, and comedy was another thing. This is all very, very true. So then she said matter-of-fact things like, well, what do I tell the boys? She goes, tell them you've spoken to me. I thought, well, that's not going to be very convincing. But luckily I recorded it so that I could play it to my brothers. And not all my brothers have listened to it because they actually can't bring themselves to listen to it because they'd be too emotionally choked up, I think, to actually listen to this, which is an interesting thing. So I actually believed it was my mum coming through. And there's another key piece of information that did convince me. A few years prior to her death, Monica, my partner, she had actually bought my mum one of those little plastic solar flowers that you can buy, I think, in the pound shop in Weymouth. You pop them in the window and their petals wave in the sunlight. Well, Monica has got some and she decided to buy my mum one. So after my mum passed away, my dad said to me, can you get me another one of these solar flowers? Monica bought it for your mum, but she hated it. And I said, oh, why does she hate it? She says, well, apparently it made a click-click noise. Every time she was trying to have an afternoon nap, it made a click-click noise, and it really used to annoy her. She hated it. She says, but I like it, and this one's broken. Can you get a new one? So I said, yeah, sure. So I told Monica this, and we set out to buy a replacement one for him. So during this session, I said to Monica, do you want to ask her a question? So she goes, yeah. She goes, Margaret, what did you think of that solar flower I bought you? And she came back and spelled out, it was nice. And then we laughed. She said, are you sure? And she came through and she says, I hated it. She said exactly the same thing that my dad had said only about a week before. I hated it. So she's being truthful. So that to me was quite a clincher. And sometimes it's the inconsequential things like that that can provide the most convincing evidence, because that is, again, you can't look up that on paper. There's nothing written down about that. There's nothing on Facebook and stuff like that. Talking of which, I've had discussions on the internet with various skeptics about all this sort of thing. And there's one guy that had a chat with me and he said, no, they get it. They get all this information off your Facebook page. And I said, really? He said, yeah. And so he went to my Facebook page. He said, for instance, I've just found out that, you work for the BBC. I said, yeah, but hang on a minute. All the information you're quoting back to me, none of that came in the reading at all. All these facts that you've written down about me, none of that was present in that reading. So surely if they were getting off Facebook, that would be the obvious things they would have picked up on. I said, and besides the fact is that you're saying that I work for the BBC, I've never worked for the BBC. So that's wrong for a start. So if they suddenly come back in the reading and say I work for the BBC, well, I'd know that was wrong. But they never said that. So I said, you are totally wrong about it. So then they have to change their tack. They say, oh, it's from your subconscious mind. I said, well, okay, how can they make predictions with the subconscious mind? How would they know about Gary Brochel's wife needing that treatment and things like that? There's no way they can get this from your subconscious mind. The subconscious mind is a bit like a wireless router in your house, is that it will channel the information through it, like from the spirit world. It will come through the subconscious mind, but the wireless router in your house does not give you Facebook. You don't walk up to your wireless router and see Facebook or emails or Twitter or anything. You have to go to another thing to see that. The wireless router is the subconscious. It brings it through. So it's not always from the subconscious mind. I said it is definitely, I believe, something in the afterlife. And it's not just my experience, it's every else's experience. You've got to take it as a whole. All these things stack up. The evidence starts to stack up in favour that is convincing me that there is an afterlife. And remember, I've been doing this for 30 odd years. And so I've seen lots of quackery. I've seen lots of poor mediumship. But to me, these guys are one of the most accurate ones, because this is where you get to ask the questions. All the mediums perhaps you've seen in the past, you don't always get to ask the questions, and they come back with the accurate results. So I think I've probably spoken about it enough. I think I could probably just sort of say, summing it up. Yeah, I mean, some skeptics say, don't bother me with the facts. My mind is made up, basically. And that's how the skeptics react. So you're never going to convince all the skeptics unless they have this experience themselves. There's another little piece of evidence, again, that can't be challenged. There's sometimes when people come for a reading, they don't always know what's happening. There was a lady that came for a reading with them, and this person came through, and he gave his name. And she said, I'm sorry, you're not anyone that's known to me. And got to find his name first, I'll forget his name. But basically, it turned out that this person claimed to be this lady's brother. And she goes, but I never had a brother. And she goes, yes, you do. My name's John, and I died before you were born in an accident. So when she got home that night, oh, and he also said, I'm buried 3 graves up in the cemetery in Bournemouth, near the gates. And so when she got home that night, she asked her mum, she goes, "Mum, have I ever had a brother?" And she goes, "Sit down, I'll tell you this story." And she said, "I was 8 months pregnant and I was involved in a car accident and I had this baby boy and he died. And I gave him the name that came through in your reading." And she said he was absolutely right with what he said. He is buried 3 graves up in the cemetery from the cemetery gates in Bournemouth. And they actually got a plan of this of where it was. So again, that was not in their subconscious mind because she didn't know it. And it's not something that could be looked up because it was not really talked about and they didn't really publish these things. So it just goes to show that the spirits know a lot more than we give them credit for. Anyway, I think I've spoken enough tonight. We actually want to hear from the duo themselves. I've spoken about the ghosts of the past, but just remember this, everybody. You're all the ghosts of tomorrow. So remember that. So anyway, now it's time to meet Andy Peel and Lisa Hyde, and known to you as Heavenly Voices. Give them a warm welcome, please. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it works. I'll grab the other mic for you.
Thank you.
Hi guys, sorry, we've just been sat at the back. We've had messages that people can't talk, and they've had to turn around and go back. And a few people are waiting for this. So I don't know where that went wrong. Maybe that's our fault. Yeah. But a big thank you to Neil.
Yeah, can we give Neil a big hand? Mine's saying yours.
Thank you.
Yeah, just going back to the readings. Who's had readings with us? You said a lot. You know how it goes. You know the thing that we do. What we want to say is everybody's readings. You know, it affects us just as much as it does you. And I want to go back to the reading that we did. I think it was the second reading that we did, and it was related to Maureen, to the big things. We were chatting to the dad, and so on. And she was asking the dad certain things, and everything was correct. We'd never met her, we didn't know anything about her, so it was all good for us. But the weird thing that came through, and this is what gets to us. A little girl came through, and she was 9 years old, and she died of cancer.
Which we think, it's affected all of you probably in this room.
Yes.
It's been 1 in 3 that suffer from cancer, and we get that a lot, don't we, when we do the readings?
She came through, and the first thing that she said to the grandma, she said, "I've got Murphy here." And we said, "Murphy?" And we looked at each other. We looked at this woman and her brother, who was sat next to her. And she said, "Hang on a minute." She said, "Yeah." I said, "I've got Murphy here." So we asked her, we said, "Who's Murphy?" It's my dog that died 2 weeks ago. And we sat there going, crying, and then this little girl started talking about herself. She said, "Thank you so much for putting me on the beach." Her last words were she wanted to be on the beach to see the sea. And somebody on Sandbanks gave them the steps so they could go and see it. She could see the sea. 2 days after going there, she suddenly passed. And she came through and she was telling us all this, and we sat there looking at each other. We got sort of tears in our eyes, and it affected us.
Yeah, especially when children come through, it really does get me there, doesn't it?
But anyway, she was going on about this reading, and she was telling her grandma and everything, and then she just stopped, and she turned around. She said to her grandma, she said, "I've got somebody else with me." And she says, "Well, I haven't lost anybody else." She said, "Yes, you have." She said, "You haven't." "I've got Sadie with me." The woman sat there, she started crying her eyes out. And, we looked again, we're going...
Who's Sadie?
Yeah, she said, "That was my dog that died last week." And she come up and she said, "The thing is, Grandma," she said, "I had to take the collar off her and wash it. She was dirty. And we sat there going, right, okay. And she just looked at us, this woman was us. When she died, they took her to the vets and she was in a right state. She got blood all over her and everything, so they didn't even wash her. And this little girl was telling her, she says, I had to wash her, I've had to change her collar. You know, and we sat there and we looked at each other and...
So how does she know that information?
Yeah, when we went home, you know, it's like everybody's readings that we've given. You know, it doesn't stop for us. It carries on for us. We go back and it goes through our heads and we're thinking this, we're thinking that. Could we have done this? Could we have done that? You know, anything better that we could have done? You know, it doesn't stop for us. So when we leave, you know, wherever's the house that we go to, it doesn't finish for us. Your reading carries on. And it just goes on and on and on and on.
And that's all part of our journey as well. All the stories along the way, that's what we remember. And that's what keeps us going. And we will keep going. I don't think we'll ever stop, will we?
Is anybody here that's booked in for reading? Can I just ask, you've obviously been recommended by somebody else or whoever?
Yeah, I've actually seen you, but it's not had a reading.
All right, yeah. What are you doing? But no, it's, from what you've been told, you know, things from other people's readings, how does that make you feel?
We can't stop now.
No, because this is what we get asked. How does it make you feel when we go to somebody's house and you're sitting in front of somebody and it's like the 9-year-old girl comes up and, you know, and this and that, and it's so hard for us because we have to sit there and go, right, look, okay, this is your reading, it's not our reading.
But we get involved, don't we, though?
We've got no choice to get involved. And, you know, a lot of people will sit there, like Neil said, you can look us up on Facebook, you can do this, you can do that. We can't. We don't do that. And
when we take bookings, though, you know, yes, some people do book on Facebook, but it is a business page, so we can't go into your profile or anything like that. And if it's a group reading, you're bringing 3 other people along with you most of the time. We don't know who you're going to bring, so we don't know anything about these people. So that goes out the window, doesn't it?
yeah, and I think when you have a child come through and they're telling you things that have happened, and you know we're sitting there going, "What? You know," and it's we're looking at people like yourselves, and that, I'm sure you've all had a message that's come through, and you've gone, "That's them," because they come through, and hopefully their personalities will come through, and they'll say things that only they would in life. You know, just quickly, as Neil said, with it, the football inside of it, we've got somebody called Steve Fletcher from Weymouth coming. His wife came and she sat down and she was having the reading. And I think it was a stepdad, wasn't it? Something like that. And anyway, she asked him a question and she said, "I'll know it's you if you answer me this one question." So we're sitting there going, we need to know this, you know, because we're nosy, we like to know everything.
Well, you are.
Most
of you probably know that.
She sat there, and it wasn't really a question she actually asked. And excuse my language, but he actually turned around and he says, "Lynn, piss off." And we went, "Oops."
We don't know where to look sometimes.
She said, "No." That's exactly what he would have said, simply because he's stuck for words. He hasn't got anything to say. And he said it 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
And, you know, we sat there and we went, where does it come from? You know,
if it's not them, who is it?
Yeah, that's how we look at it.
We believe it's them, but, you know, we're not here to make anyone believe, but that's what we believe.
I mean, when we walk into people's homes, the first thing is we say, you know, we could sit there and get nothing. We don't want to portray ourselves as yes, you're going to get this is going to happen, we don't know what's going to happen. But in the 12 years that we've been doing it, you know, if you'd have sat through what we've sat through, there's
no doubt in our minds.
There's something. But I think the most important thing, Lisa's going to say something now about her family, which is, I think this is what most of you probably need to hear.
Just something that's close to my heart, really. Like we've touched upon, cancer. 5 years ago, I lost my stepdad, John, to cancer. And I think that really hit it home to me personally. And sorry, this is the same. We sit and watch you cry most nights. It's changed for me. Sorry. And you know, it hit us really, really bad, like it would hit you guys as well, especially for my mum, because obviously, you know, she lost her soulmate. But doing what we do, talking, you know, to our loved ones, we knew that we could speak to him again. We knew we could ask him, you know, if he was all right and if he got there safely. So, you know, we didn't hesitate. We got the table out and he sat with me. My mum sat with us. And he come through straight away. And you know, we asked questions like we do with all of you to validate. And we did. We asked questions. My mum asked questions. And some of the answers I didn't even know. So when he come through, the one thing that stood out that he said was to my mum, "Look, I want you to move on. I want you to be happy. I want you to find someone else. And eventually get married." And at the time, my mum was like, "Well, you know, I'd never really get married again. I don't think that's for me." You know, because she's grieving, she didn't think that was possible. But the more and more we talked to him, he kept saying the same thing. And over time, she became a lot more confident in herself. And she sat me down one day and she said, "Lisa, you know, I don't want to be on my own. I don't want to be lonely anymore." And I said, "Well, don't be. Do what John's asked you to do, move on." And so she joined this little dating agency. First of all, she's just doing like pen and pal letters and things like that, but nothing really come of it. And then she joined this other dating agency. And she won't get much luck to start with, bless her. And then this lovely young man came along, and I'm calling you young, Doug, because you're here tonight. And, you know, it was a whirlwind. She fell in love, you know, very quickly with him, and they moved in together about a year after. And, you know, she said to me at the time that she wasn't going to ever get married. Well, last year she went out and got married. Now, to me, she listened to what my stepdad wanted. At first, she thought, no, never. Like I say, because you know, he was her soulmate. But to move on like he wanted, you know, like I said, all he wanted was her to be happy. And I've never seen her happier than she is at the moment. So thank you, Doug. And thank you personally for making me happy. You know, it has been hard for her. It's been hard for both of them. Doug actually lost his wife. Was it to cancer? Yeah. So cancer is a big, big thing for all of us. And 1 in 3 readings, that's what we get, isn't it? People who have cancer. So the message there really is, please just listen to what they're saying. That's the important message. Whatever they need to say to you, you need to take on board. Because my mum did, and she's happy. So it can be done.
And the good thing, when we had one reading, we got there, which Neil mentioned is the policeman. And we went in, didn't we?
Yeah.
We sat down, and he actually had takeaway, we had curry, everything.
Yeah, so expect that from all of you, by the way.
You know, when we come to your house,
They can't have a reading, that's what we say.
but, you
And a cup
know,
of tea.
when we sat down with him, when we first started, we look at it now, and it's like we was hoping people had got tables.
Because we had cards at the time, didn't we? We had cards. And yeah, if they didn't have a table, we were a bit stuffed when we got there. So we need to curry and go.
Yeah, we were actually stuck that night. And it was like, You know, we sat there going, you haven't got a table. No.
But he actually brought out this massive piece of wood, MDF, wasn't it? And so he sat on a coffee table with this bit of MDF, managed to get all the letters round. I thought, well, if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But he got everything.
But there again, you know, he was a big bloke. He drove motorbikes when he plays motorbikes, and he sat there.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to mess with him.
You know, and he was sat there and he was going, yeah, right, come on, let's start, let's do this, do that. But the first thing that came out was his brother's name. And then when that came out, he was sort of like, yeah, okay, well, whatever. But then he turned around and he says, okay, brother, you know, he says, I'll read your letter every night. You know, and he sat there and he looked at us, and this bloke had gone from big, and he sat there crying his eyes out. And we were going, what does it mean? You know, does it, you know, what does it mean? Mm-hmm. And he said, the last thing I did, I put a letter in his coffin and said, you better read this every night. We would never have known that, you know, and
that wasn't even prompted, was it? He just came out and said that.
You know, people that I can see sort of around here that have had readings and things like that, you know, things that we've always said, just to get people's names. You know, we don't know you, you know, we've never seen you before when we're coming into your house, you know, or you come and visit us, so we don't know anything about you. You know,
but that's the way we like it. We don't want to know anything.
Yeah, but just to get a name is good enough for us. Now, a lot of people will sit there and they'll go, well, you can't really do it this way, you can't do it. Look, if they want to come through and talk, does it matter what way you do it? As long as we get that little message that says, that's me, that's all we're looking for. And just to go on to a prediction we had, you know.
We do get a lot of predictions. Has anybody here had any predictions come through? Anything? Little hand at the back. Yeah. So
some others just put your hands up in front of it.
To make us feel a bit better.
Yeah. But no, four women came, and people have probably heard this story, but even now, you know, it just amazes us. You know, somebody was supposed to come with these four people who couldn't come. They were talking to the nan, and they said to the nan, you know, who she'll be that isn't. She gave us the name. Why is she not here? She's in slow labour. You know, so we're going, all right, okay, well, that's fine. And then one woman that wasn't at the table, she sat there and she asked, come on, Nan, when's she going to have this baby? You know, we just sat there looking at each other going, what's happened? We didn't know. Now, these other people just sat there with their mouths open going, what have we done?
I think a lot of you think that we know what's going to happen, but we don't have the time to.
We sat there and we was going, you know, don't worry, we'll move in a minute. Don't move, don't worry. Move, please. Please move now. You know, and they were sat there and they were going, oh. Our first thoughts were, is there something wrong with the baby? I know it sounds horrible, you know, but that was our first thought. Anyway, the glass eventually moved again, isn't it? And she spelled out, it's all right, darling, she said, the baby will be here tomorrow at 3 p.m. £7.6 and this little girl. So they laughed at it,
yeah.
Because that can't be correct because nobody knows what the baby is. They didn't want to find out. So we just said, right, well, let us know tomorrow. If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. So we
went through the day, didn't we? Didn't hear anything.
And we thought, right, that's what she thought. So anyway, we got that late that night, didn't we? And she sent us this message. She said, oh guys, could we please book in for next year? And we'll withdraw that tomorrow. And then she gave us another message saying, okay guys, just need to tell you we've been sat here since 5 o'clock and nobody's spoken to each other. And we're going,
oh dear.
Oh crikey, I'll let Lisa deal with that. You know, and it was like, and I was just about to go to bed and it beeped again. And she said, just to let you know, baby was born today, 3 p.m, £7.6. It's a little girl.
No.
So we're sitting there going,
it was almost like when the glass stopped and she wasn't talking, it was like, I'm just going to pop off. And then I'll come back and tell you. That's what it was like to us, wasn't it?
Yeah.
We sort of joked about it afterwards, but.
You know, I mean, you know, the thing is, once again, like Neil said, you know, we have done celebrity readings, but it's no different to everybody that's sat here. You know, we don't take it differently. Yes, we've got this Steve Fletcher coming. You know, I'm not a Bournemouth fan, so it don't really bother me. You know, I'm not going to tell you who I support. So,
we've got it tattooed in here somewhere.
Somewhere. But anyway, you know, it's. And then when he actually messaged us, he was, "Hi, this is Steve Fletcher. You know I am." Blah blah blah. And it's like,
I didn't know he was.
you know, why are you saying that? You know, you're no different to like yourselves. You sit here, you go to people's homes. It doesn't matter whether you've been on TV. It doesn't matter whether you've been on this. It really doesn't matter. And you know, we've given the filming that we did. We put that to one side now to concentrate on people like yourselves. We couldn't do it because we wouldn't be able to sort of rest, because if you turn around and said you've got to go, you've got somebody for filming, off we go. Some of you could have been waiting a year for your reading, we'd have to go. So we don't want to do that. You're the ones that have got us here, you're the ones that we're going to concentrate on. And you're the most important things.
And we can't thank you enough for coming out this evening. I mean, you obviously got nothing better to do, but no, one of the
the messages that we just replied to sat at the back saying people can't find parking.
And people can't make it and things.
You know.
You know, but thank you for the people that have come out tonight. We do really appreciate all your support over the 12 years that we've been doing this. I mean, some of the messages you sent us saying that, you know, you changed my life. It's like, wow, we can't ask for anything more than that. You know, messages you put on your Facebook page as well that we don't get to see, you know, and all the recommendations. I mean, when we first started out, we didn't have any meetings at all, did we? You know, we'd have one week, and it could be months before we get another one. Now it's a little bit different story, but that's all thanks to you. And we can't stress that enough, can we?
This is why we did this tonight. It's just our way of thanking you. You know, you invite us into your house. We're complete strangers. You know, we could come in and wreck it. You know, and it's like, you know, we could, you know. But you know, the thing is, we like to have a laugh and joke. You know, we're not like normal mediums who will come in and say this and say that, and you know, really sort of.
We take what we do. Well, we do take what we do seriously. But we do like to make you feel comfortable and at ease, and I hope the people that have had readings have felt that way. And I think a lot of people like the fact that there are two of us as well. Makes you feel a little bit more comfortable.
I mean, I must admit, there's one person sat here. I've got to mention this. I won't mention any names. No. But you know, her dad came through. And she said to him, you know, what was my nickname? And we're sitting there going, oh, come on, I know this, you know. And he spelled out Tuffy. And we looked and we went, really?
Cheers, Andy.
No. And it's like, that's a squirrel. Yeah? And she said, yeah, it was, he actually got it from the squirrel. You know, and we sat there and we was going, you know, and this is what we do have to try and, it's so hard for us, you know, we've been into people's homes and people have come, you know, we've left and they've gone, they've just looked at us and gone, you know, don't ever stop doing this. You know, and we've looked and we've gone,
I think we'll be old and grey by the time we stop this. Well, I can't tell you that you'll go grey. When I first met him, he had hair, believe it or not, bleach blonde hair, didn't you? 12 years ago.
It's you that's made me lose it. But no, you know, I mean, we, like I say, when we do, and we've given our readings, we do go home and we sit there and we go over it and over it and over it. And we can't come up with anything apart from that's how it is. We just can't. We just can't get away from that. And we're not putting things into your mouths. We're not saying, yes, that's who it was. That's what we're saying. And we'd never push anything on you. And, you know, we've seen mediums ourselves, not intentionally. We've been pushed to do it.
But then we have mediums come to us as well, so it's no different. we all like to know how we work in many ways, don't we?
Yeah. It's just, it's just, we do it this way.
We just do it
And it
different,
works.
yeah.
So it's what we do, and we intend to be here for quite a while yet.
Yeah. As long as you want us, that is, as long as you're recommended, we can't really see an end to it, can we?
And don't everybody shout at once. but people that are waiting for their readings again, we really do hope that when we come, or you come to us, we can sit there, we can connect you to whoever it is you want to speak to. But we say to everybody, like Lisa said, the famous word cancer. It's, we've had people, we have a lot of people who have had suicides, and people say to us when this comes up, how do you deal with that? It's not how we deal with it, it's how you deal with it.
Yeah.
And yes, as much as we want to turn around and go, don't worry, they're fine, they're saying this, we can't do that because we don't know. But at the same time, they always come up with one saying that they always used to say, and that knocks it on the head. And that turns around, people turn around and go, oh, hang on a minute, only they would know that. That's what we're saying to you. Take that away with it, with you. Just take that one saying away. They'll always turn around and say to you that they love you, they miss you, but we don't know, we can't have that. That's what they say.
You would say that, wouldn't you, really? I don't know if I was the other side. I would certainly say that because you do.
Yeah, but looking at some people here, I think there's one person here, Bobby, we've given a few readings to now, and we've sat and listened, and when we've given her a reading, and it's so hard, and as much as we want to turn around and go, Bobby, they're saying this, they're saying that, listen to what they're saying. They do, but
it takes time.
It's hard. It really, really is hard. And I think when they give them that one thing, once again, where they turn around and say something to them, and then they look really surprised. But we're sitting there saying, well, did they say that? Well, yeah, that's exactly how they say it. So there you go. Take that away. Because that is what they say. And
Bobby, I think you're coming up in a bit, aren't you, later on? Yeah, you are. Yeah. She's going to come up and say a few words about a reading, and near the end, what we'll do afterwards is we'll have a break, so you'll get a drink and toilet break and things. Then we'll do the raffle. We've got a fabulous raffle there, lots of lovely prizes. We've got a few actually that have been added since. So we'll do the raffle during the break, and then we'll come back and we'll invite a few people up just to chat about their readings. We have got people that said they will. I don't know if they're here tonight, but we've got about 5 people on there. But one of them's Bobby, so she'll start off properly, Bobby. So if anybody else,
if you don't bother yourself,
if anybody else wants to come up and say a few words as well, please do. We'd really like to hear from you. The lady in the back, if the prediction came, Leanne, talk to you. There's no one behind you. If the prediction did come true for you, or whatever, or if it didn't, then like to come up if you can. That'd be wonderful.
We know Neil's got a few questions for us. Is there anybody here that's got any questions?
Don't all shout at once. Throw anything at us. Well, not tomatoes.
Yeah, the way you do it, you've had your readings, maybe something's come out that, I don't know, hasn't come true or not, or shocked you. If anybody's got any questions, just get it off your chest and say what you want to say.
We'll leave you to think about that. Oh, I've got one. I don't know.
Standing up there now,
Yeah.
Have you got energy and see if there's anyone here?
No, that's not how it works. Have you had a reading with us?
Yes.
Oh, you have?
2 years ago, yeah.
Oh, okay. So you'll know obviously how we do it and how it works. We don't work that way in the respect that we feel things for certain people. we'll see things ourselves and we hear things and things like that. So, but we're not mediums in the sense that we could say, right, well, I've got you a man here or a woman here from you. It's not kind of, but that's how I've got the table.
Yeah, yeah.
They come through that.
So when you had your reading, did it go well, not so well?
Amazing. It was absolutely amazing.
How did you feel about the way we do it?
Were you scared at all, or?
I was scared because I thought I just looked at it as like a Ouija board.
Yeah.
What I've seen as a Ouija board is, and when I try and explain it to everybody else,
They
how I
don't.
do it,
Yeah.
they're like, you don't know what you're getting yourself into. And I just try to explain that when
Yeah.
you do the reading, you do a prayer to do like the whole
That's right, yeah.
nice thing in, you put candles around the room and play music in the background and everything else. And when I had my reading, my mum came with me because she was a bit sceptical. She's had like bad experiences in her life with poltergeist and everything. And I'm the kind of person that will try and give stuff away, if that makes sense. So that's the reason why my mum came with me basically. And somebody come in that was unexpected, that we didn't really want to hear from. I know it sounds horrible, but
Well, we get a lot like that.
Yeah.
We get a lot. I don't talk to them.
it's coming first, and my mum was just absolutely blown away. She was in tears. My cousin come in, and from that reading, it was like a week, 2 weeks on, and all this stuff was happening. It was just really strange. Like, so I was 10 years old when my cousin died in a car crash, and the person that was driving at the time, he had only passed the test 2 days before, and there was 2 cars. So he's never known me. I never had Facebook at that time, and it was probably about 2 weeks later. I had a friend request from this driver. He's lived in Australia for 10 years. And it was just out of the blue.
Was this after the reading? Sorry.
Yes. It was like a week, 2 weeks later.
Yeah.
And then, a photo frame come off my side of my bedside table with a picture of my cousin in it. And it was just like literally put on the end of my bed. And I've never had an experience
Like that.
from like a spirit before. But ever since then, I've had like niggly things that are happening. But it's just.
So do you feel it's quite positive for you, that experience?
Yeah. And one of the words that he said to me in the reading, because I said to him, I wish you never left. And he said, I'll never leave you again. I'm sorry for leaving. And I think that was his way of saying, I'll always be with you now. But it was just really, really strange. I could go on and on and on, because there was like seven of us that had an individual reading. But my partner was at the time, and his uncle died I think it was about 4 months beforehand.
Yeah.
And he come through, and they all live up in Birmingham. And I just said to Paul, because he was very sceptical, we didn't believe in anything like it at all. So when he had that reading, he was like, that is unbelievable. He said,
that's brilliant, but we're not here to change people's views.
No.
But that's great that he feels that way after his reading.
Yeah, he
we
does.
We can ask for any more than that.
But yeah.
After your reading, how did you feel? Because you said you were scared at first.
It was like a relief that he was still there, and he was there. But in a way, after the reading, I was just like, I want to keep talking to him now. I want to do it all the time.
Yeah. And then we were a bit like that when we started. We every night.
And I was like quite scared, like afterwards, like if he's going to follow me home or something silly like that.
Yeah,
but in a way.
It's people you know though.
Yeah.
It's not like a random person coming in.
So every night I was just going to bed, I was like, Tom, please don't scare me. Because it was just a big relief, and I was just happy to know where he was, and he said it was a beautiful place where he was when I had this reading done, so it was just amazing.
Could I just ask, is he the one that's buried in the crematorium in Weymouth?
Yes. Yeah.
Was it one we went to see?
We went to put some flowers on his grave.
Oh.
Because I've got a few members of my family in the same crematorium, because I'm actually from Weymouth, so Weymouth's quite
Yeah.
dear to my heart, Weymouth.
Yeah.
So we were in there anyway, weren't we? And we looked for it.
Oh, thank you.
So, yeah.
Can I just ask, is there any sceptics in you?
So you're all believers, would you say? Yeah. Yeah.
Because we just recently, we've been sort of talking about this, And we've been having inquiries from Australia, West Indies, South Africa,
Pennsylvania.
yeah, Pennsylvania, Arizona. And, you know, we've had people, you know, saying, right, I'm coming over from America. And the first thing I'm going to do is come and see you. You know, and it's like, oof.
Crazy.
There we go, well. We've come all the way from America, and the first thing we've got to say is, nice to hear and not get nothing.
It's a long way to go. It is. But then we had someone come from London, didn't we?
Yeah.
As well. No, it was America, but he was in London, wasn't he? He came to London and he hired a car, came down, we had to find him a B&B, we stayed over, and like Andy said, well, if we don't get anything, he's come all this way. And yeah, he did, didn't he? He spoke to his dad, and his dad was German, wasn't he?
Yeah.
So, you know, and he got everything, he said, can't explain that. And, you know, he said, we'll see me again. We haven't yet, but I'm sure we will.
But, you know, we go back, like your readings, you know, I think we go back, let's go back, say, 12 years.
Crikey, I can't remember last week.
When we had a few readings, but nothing fantastic, you know, odd one here, odd one there. And, you know, I think week one, we was at one stage, we were thinking of giving it up. Because we didn't put ourselves about.
Yeah, we're named differently as well, don't know. Our first name was Touch Glass, and then we're Hiding Peel, and now we're Heavy Voices, so a few names changed. Did anyone know us as Touch Glass? Probably not. No? Hiding Peel? No. Just Heavy Voices then, it obviously works. We'll keep it.
We've had some nasty names as well, so that's,
yeah.
you know, we'll accept them. You know, but we sort of, there again, going back and looking at yourselves and going to people's homes, and, you know, we're not at home. We're on travelling to Weymouth, Dorset, you know, all the time.
That's why we're here, really, because we thought, yeah, you've got fun coming. She did.
Yeah, nothing to turn out. You know, we've had people come from Birmingham. We had two women come, didn't we? And we sat there, and we came to Lisa's house, sat down, had a cup of tea, we just chatting, and we'd at least, you know, so come far. We just got here from Wales. And we looked at each other and went, oh God. You know, we've actually just driven here.
And they're driving back the same night, weren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she said, this is just on the recommendation of somebody. That's all she said. And we sat there, didn't we? We thought, all right, come on, let's get down to it. And they had a great reading. One of the women, she was sat there and her mouth was open. She was going, who's moving that? Who's pushing it? Who's doing this? Who's doing that? You know, no, just talk.
The expressions we see on people's faces are priceless.
You know, they were going, you know, they got everything that they had. And to come that far, and, you know, we sat there, didn't we? And we're going, Wales.
It's a long way.
It's a long way, you know, and just to see us.
So we're making a bit of an effort, and we were in Birmingham last year, the first time in December, and really big family in Birmingham, lovely family in Riveria. And we're going to go back there every year, there'll be different people, and then we're going down to London, July. So we're actually making an effort to come to you guys as well, but obviously travel far.
So I think what we're going to do, did you want to throw some questions?
Yeah, I'll come up. Hang on.
Nice questions.
Of course. Only the gentlest of questions. It's my lights. That's my lights. Okay. If I come on this microphone so people can hear me. Okay. Okay. Obviously, when you set out in the big world, you have no idea of what you're going to end up doing. You obviously think, I want to do this for a job, I want to do that for a job, and things like that. Does it really shock you? Do you have to kind of pause for breath and think, what the hell are we doing? You know?
Well, every reading we do still amazes us with stuff that comes through, but because we enjoy what we do, it doesn't feel like a job to us.
Yeah,
It really
yeah.
doesn't, does it?
And do you get any indication from anyone that comes through about predictions about yourself, about where you're going to go with this?
No, we've just been, like you said in the beginning, we were just told to do this, and we just feel that's our vocation in life, to carry on doing what we do and helping people, really.
But, I mean, we're no different to yourselves. We sat speaking to our families. And if your families, any member of your family sat there and said, you've got to do this, get on with it, you know, it's going to take time. You know, we're sat there going, really, what are we supposed to do? You know, and we did. What are we supposed to do with this? And all she kept saying was, you're going to help a lot of people. And this is how you must do it. Get on with it and don't look back. And we sat there for 2 years, didn't we? And it was like, really? How long more, you know, how long have we got to wait? And that's when we were going to give it up. We actually honestly sat there and we thought, enough's enough, you know, we're not getting anywhere with this.
But then we found Facebook, didn't we? So that helped.
Yeah.
We didn't know, we've been learning the whole way through this, to be honest. We didn't have Facebook for a number of years until somebody said, put yourself on Facebook. So we did, and that, you know, we thought, oh, 100 likes. You know, so, you know, it's just one of those things, wasn't it? We just thought, yeah, give it a go, see what happens. And, you know, we've got so many followers now on Facebook, and just wanting to know what we're doing and what we're up to. It's, you know, and the response we get that we, for any post that we put on, it's brilliant.
Do any of you see the responses that people make on our Facebook pages?
Yeah.
What do you think to that? Because we don't ask them. We don't ask them to do it, they just do it off their own back. You know, and for them to do that, you know, especially when you get a message, like Lisa said, you know, you've changed my life, I'm doing this now, I'm doing that, I'm moving forward, and this is what they wanted me to do, and, you know, just quickly, I think you need to tell them about the puppies.
Oh yeah, we touched on predictions earlier, and just what we were going to say to you. We have a lot of predictions about births. You know, people come to us that are pregnant, don't know what they're having, talking to loved ones, and they obviously ask the question, do you know what I'm having? And they tell them. Obviously it's a 50-50 chance, a lot of people probably say that. But we had how many in the space of?
7.
About 7 couples in the space of sort of a couple of months, wasn't it? Yeah. And they all got back to us, and it was right what they were saying. So they said that either boy or girl, had to do one or the other. And then, thank you. And then we had one lady that came to us, sat at the table speaking to, I think it was a mum, it could have been a gran. And we always ask foundation questions like we do with you guys. And she asked her mum what her dog's name was. Come through, spell it out, correct. And her mum said then that her dog was going to have puppies. And she said, well, that can't be right, because I've been told that she can't have puppies. It was strange thing to say anyway. But no, she's insistent that her dog was going to have puppies. And she said, going to have 4 + 2, roughly. And we were like, okay, well, just keep us informed. Like we say to all of you, if you've got anything, you know, that comes true, please let us know. We're interested in all that. And basically, it was about 4 months later, we got a message out of the blue from this lady, and it's a scan picture of a dog, and it had 4 6 puppies.
4 + 2 puppies.
Yeah, in her belly. Oh. And she actually sent us a scan picture. She said, I can't believe this, my dog's pregnant. I mean, how wonderful is that? You know, we get babies, but puppies was a bit of a surprise for us, but, you know.
God knows what we're going to get next.
Yeah. All sorts of it. Yeah, so, you know, touching upon that again, that's really good. I mean, we don't know that they know the future. Some do, some don't. And, you know, a lot of people do ask questions about the future, which, you know, we have. Sometimes it can be just their opinion on what they think, but other times it's what they know. And when they do know these things, about going back to that story with the 4 ladies from Weymouth, that was spot on. So when they do know things, they're pretty much spot on, aren't they?
I think with Lynn Fletcher, who became Steve Fletcher's wife, when she just said to the set there, you know, I'm going to ask you this question, it actually deceived us because she said she was going to ask him a question, but it wasn't actually a question. And when he said what he did, you know, she sat there and I think her mum was in tears, she was in tears. That's enough for us, and you need to really understand that from our point of view. That's to see you cry. We're not saying we want to see you cry.
We don't aim to make you cry.
Well,
Maybe you do.
but you know, but to see that, and we can sit there, we take a break, and we look at you, and you know, we've had people sitting there, and they're so shaky, and whatever. We've had one person nearly pass out, and
We thought we needed to take an ambulance at one point, didn't we? She wanted to, and then she hyperventilated, and I was like, calm down.
I went out and sat on the toilet, left it to Lisa. But you know, but it's all because whoever she was speaking to mentioned one thing to her, and she said without a doubt that's them. And she was actually in the room going, where are they? Where are they? You know, and that's his. We don't know, you know, they're moving the glass. And that's what panicked her, because she couldn't get her head round it, the glass was moving without anybody pushing it. And we've said this time and time again, you know, it doesn't matter who thinks, if we're pushing it, whoever's in the room, we've all got to be thinking of the same thing. And that's, to me, is impossible. So, you know, whatever they do come out with, as we've said before, to me and Lisa, it's them. So, should we get on with it?
I think we'll spend some, yeah. Was there anything else you wanted to?
I think that is it. I think that's it.
Thank you so much for your
Thank you.
journey on us. Very interesting, and I hope you all enjoyed it as well. So we're going to take a short break.
We're going to take a short break
Now,
and do the
please
raffle.
do take this.
Do the raffle, and then we're going to pick certain people to come up.
Give people some things to say.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's all right for people that we do want to come.
All right. Round of applause for Heavenly Voices, everybody. Thank you.
Okay, so my first reading with Heavenly Voices was in May 2016 after my sister passed away. I'd never had a reading like this before, so was unsure of how the whole experience would be. At first, I was very nervous. I could hardly believe what was happening. My sister at the time of her reading was still in the Chapel of Rest. Her funeral was in 5 days. She told me all of the arrangements that we had made, the song choices, the items we had placed in her coffin, the outfit she was wearing. All of her answers came back very accurate. I was in total shock. I had always believed in life after death, but never in a million years thought I would have the chance to communicate to her in such an accurate way. My next reading was booked for November 2017. But this time, I was not only wanting to make contact with my sister, but to my dad, who had sadly passed away 2 weeks before my next reading. Seeing my dad suffer due to his short illness broke me in two. I couldn't handle watching such a strong man who had made me so proud go through such a sad end to his life. But once again, the relief that came over me during my reading when he told me he wasn't suffering or in pain anymore. This was what I needed to hear to start my journey of healing. And that journey is all down to you both. Without your support and help and guidance by bringing my dad and sister to me to deliver their messages has helped me in so many ways. I can't thank you enough for the past 2 years, and I now feel stronger and ready to take on any challenges thrown at me. My dad and sister have given me their strength, all thanks to you both. You are amazing. Our paths crossed for a reason in 2016. I am truly blessed with knowing two genuine people who want to help by taking the suffering and pain away from everyone that come into contact with them. Thank you both from the bottom of my heart. for bringing messages of love from my dad and sister.
Give a round of applause, please. Let's take lots of other into it. Cool, it's a little bit daunting when you get up here, isn't it? Thankfully, there's not so many people in
Yeah, some of them have gone home, you're all right.
So, like everybody else, I lost my mum to cancer probably about 7-8 years ago now. I was a skeptic. I didn't believe in the afterlife, and I saw many different mediums before who, for me, were really didn't deliver me anything intangible, and I'd walk away from those mediums and feel that they hadn't really given me anything that I could definitely solidly put my hand on and say that my mum was there. So I was recommended by Mel to come and see Heavenly Voices, and I first saw them in Dorset. And it was quite interesting because when Andy and Lisa do what they do, I found that their personalities definitely come through. So my mum was one of these people that probably, would be the person shouting loudest to get through on the reading. And her personality came through before we had any real endorsement of her being her. She apologised straight away. And after we confirmed who it was actually my mum, Andy and Lisa asked, why did you say sorry? And she said, I died too soon. So, it's been 8 years now, so I can stand up here without getting emotional because I actually feel that my mum has passed and she will be there waiting for me. So, I guess one of the questions on my first reading was, were you at the barbecue? Sounds like a bit of a strange question, but 2 weeks before my reading, my daughter told me that there was somebody standing in my neighbour's house. And I laughed it off and said, oh, don't worry, it's just my mum. And didn't give it another thought. So when I went to my reading, I asked my mum, were you at the barbecue? And she said, yes. And that wasn't enough for me because I'd been to these mediums and readings before. So I said, well, what room were you in? And it came back, I was at the window. And I said, well, that's still not enough for me. There's a big house, it's going to be in one window, sure. And I said, what room were you in? She said, I was in the conservatory. So that for me was real confirmation because that's exactly where my daughter was pointing. For 10 minutes in a garden full of people having a barbecue, adamant there was somebody there. The story is quite an interesting one because, and this is quite personal to say, but I think it's really important given the number of people that have turned out today and some of the people that haven't had a reading. Now, after my mum passed, and families either, have strength in one another and move forward together, but sometimes there are questions left unanswered, and that's quite difficult for people to comprehend and move on with. So my particular story kind of goes a little bit like this. Probably about 2 years after my mum died, my dad had a really difficult conversation with me, and he basically disputed parentage and thought he wasn't my dad. So at this particular reading, I asked my mum if there was any truth in it, and she said no. But she could also tell me who my dad thought my true dad was through that reading, which was a really, really difficult position for these guys to be in, because I'm asking some really awkward, pokey, challenging questions of my mum who's passed, but hugely emotional because I'd grown up for 45 years thinking who I knew my dad was. So that was really, really a difficult time for me. And when Andy and Lisa say they go away from these readings not being touched by this type of emotion, it must be really difficult.
Now, most of you have had readings, so you know how the glass flows. On that particular reading, the glass flew around the table really easily, answered lots of my questions, and my mum's personality came through, on a number of occasions. A couple of years later, I went back, and this thought in my head about, was my dad my dad? I was due to get married, and it was quite an uncomfortable place, really, in terms of being troubled by what my dad had said. So when I went back to the next reading, it was really strange that my mum didn't really want to come through, and the glass there was real hesitance in the glass moving and her wanting to answer my questions. So I feel that she kind of knew what was coming, and she could see what was going on in my life, and she had the forethought, I guess, to probably be quite uncomfortable. So I asked my mum, did she know what I had in the car? And she spelled out DNA test, which is quite mind-blowing, really, because one, you'd never have known what the questions were coming, and also never know what was in the car. Now, asking your parent, those types of questions is challenging enough. So, I left that table that night not actually knowing pretty, an answer to my question. I had my mum's view on the world, but it was only post having my reading and then going through the trauma of having a DNA test that I really understood who my dad was. So I guess, my story is a real mixed bag of emotions in every different reading. You don't really know what you're going to get. But I've not lost any respect to my mum through this whole experience. I'm reassured that my mum's there for me, which makes me feel really, really comfortable and a comfortable space to be in. I'm actually looking forward to my next reading next year.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you.
Is there anybody else? Or lady in the corner?
I can't talk properly.
Give a round of applause, everyone. Everyone is hard to get up here on stage. Thank you.
You was quicker when you won the prize.
Basically, I've been for 2 readings, and both have been absolutely fantastic. My first reading was just after my husband died, and it gave me a great sense of comfort and just to carry on and just knowing that everything was going to be okay. And then the second time I came for a reading was because I'd met someone else, and I had this sense of wanting to know that that was okay. And I spoke to my husband, Tom, and he was talking about my partner and just how great he was with our daughter, because when my husband died, I was 6 months pregnant. So, and it was nice to know that he was okay with everything. But while I was there, he told me that in 2018 I'd have a baby, a little boy who weighed 8.1. Well, I'm pregnant and due actually on his anniversary, which is strange.
Do you know what you're
And having a boy.
Are you?
So, but obviously I don't know how much it's going to weigh.
Oh, let us
but,
know.
I'll let you know. But yeah,
that's
that's
fantastic.
but I just want to say as well, massive thank you, because once and after everything, and when he was gone, I didn't really have the courage to do anything, and I'd lost myself completely. And you two totally helped me move on, and
You've helped yourself.
great comfort. But just coming to you for the messages and everything, it was just a great comfort, and you're amazing at what you do. So
Oh,
thank
bless
you
your
very
heart.
much.
Oh, good luck. Good luck with you.
Wow, thank you for that story. That's amazing. It really is. Anybody else?
I can just say something from the last lady's speech, this is what it's all about. You know, and I think, like we said, it was your husband that we put the flowers on when we visited his grave. And I think just to listen to you, just saying what you've just said, you know, you've just said to us how much it means to you.
Yeah.
You know, you do really have to understand that how much it means to us. You know, just for you to step up on here, say what you've said, you know, it is hard. You know, we was, before we came tonight, you know, we were bricking ourselves.
Not quite how we put it, but yeah.
But well, yeah. But, you know, for you to do that, Bobby, you know, and Tony and yourself, you know, it takes a lot. It really does take a lot. And that's, you know, as we'll go back again, when we walk into your houses and you sit there and you've got people who are not sure, it takes a lot to actually go through what you do with your reading. It really does. And, you know, to give you that little bit of confirmation, if we can say that, hence, you know, you just said you're pregnant. You know,
He was right.
we can't question that. You know, it doesn't matter what anybody says, doesn't matter what anybody thinks in here. You know, to us, we can't question that. So, you know, to all of you that's come tonight, thank you. We're sorry that other people couldn't park and they couldn't be here. You know, but for you that have taken the time just to come here and listen to us go on, you know, it really means a lot.
We've just got a few thank yous to say to a few other people before you leave. We'd like you to come up on the stage. Do you want to do it?
He's going to take over for a minute.
Yeah. All right.
Go in.
Bobby.
Hello. I'm making a mess. I've got nothing to put under it. These are for you, lovely. Thank you for the sorting out the raffle, getting all those wonderful prizes, and thank you for coming up and speaking to us.
You're welcome.
Not come back if you want to. Yeah.
Miriam. Still leaking.
We didn't think about that, did we? Well, you didn't. You put them in a bucket.
I was told to.
These are for you, Mum. Thank you for your help with the raffle. Thank you. No, thank you.
Gary. Give her the wettest look.
Oh, thank you.
Your help with everything, darling.
Thank you.
Gonna hate us for this one.
Yes.
Next one.
And the last one, my wife, Jenny.
I'm getting there. Thank you, darling. Thank you for all your help this evening. Oh, that's no problem. Thank you. I'll read this later.
And just one other thank you. We want to thank both our families, my husband, my children, my mum, who supported me ever since we started what we did, and Andy's family as well. I want to thank Jenny, Adam, Sophie. You've been a star throughout it all. You've had to put up a lot from us, haven't they? So thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts. And
Thank you to Neil.
yeah, thank you, Neil. Fabulous speech. We hope you all enjoyed it. And thank you to Andy, personally myself, for being a really good partner. although, you know, I could have killed him at times. But yeah, thanks very much. It's been a start.
Yeah, I suppose I'm going to thank you back. But just before you do go, just a little thing I've got to say about Lisa is we actually had an inquiry from Holland, and actually said to us, I phoned her, I said, have you seen that? She said, what? I said, the inquiry from Holland. She said, you idiot, it's from the Netherlands. Okay, Lisa, there's loads more I could say, but I'm not going to embarrass her. So, but just, that's what I have to put up with, you know, so just thinking. But once again, thank you all for coming. We hope to see you soon for your readings, and the ones that haven't had the readings yet, we'll look forward to seeing you as well.
Safe journey home, all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.